The engine died with a violent cough, smoke pouring from beneath the chrome like a dying breath. She stood there, alone on a highway that stretched into nowhere, her helmet clutched in trembling hands. For the first time in her life, Phoenix Monroe, one of America's youngest billionaires, was completely powerless. No assistance, no private jets, no escape, just her, a broken motorcycle, and the terrifying realization that money couldn't fix everything. Little did she know, the man who would change her life forever was 3 miles away, and he didn't have a dollar to spare. If you believe that real wealth has nothing to do with your bank account, that one stranger's kindness can rewrite your entire story, then like, subscribe, and share for more stories that matter. Because what happens next will restore your faith in humanity. 3 weeks earlier, Phoenix had everything. At just 25, she'd built a tech empire that made Forbes call her a genius and Fortune call her unstoppable. She lived in a Manhattan penthouse, wore designer everything, and dated a venture capitalist named Damian Cross who looked perfect on her arm. The night he proposed in front of 300 guests at her company's anniversary gala should have been the happiest moment of her life. But later that night, she overheard him on the phone with his brother, laughing, calling her his golden ticket, saying he'd never have to work another day once they were married. Those words shattered something inside her. The next morning, she returned the ring, deleted every social media account, and walked into a Brooklyn motorcycle shop where nobody knew her name. She bought a vintage Harley, threw some clothes in a backpack, and rode away from the only life she'd ever known. She just wanted to feel real. She wanted to meet people who saw her, not her money. Now here she was, stranded on a country road with a blown engine, and for the first time in years, she felt alive. Mason Cole saw the smoke before he saw the rider. He just finished his shift at the sawmill, his beat-up truck loaded with timber that needed delivery before dark. His 8-year-old daughter, Emma, sat beside him humming along to the radio, her gap-toothed smile the only thing that kept him going these days. After losing his wife, Rachel, 3 years ago, Mason had made a promise. He'd give Emma the love of 2 parents, even if it meant working himself to the bone. "Daddy, someone's in trouble," Emma said, pointing at the figure beside the motorcycle. Mason slowed down. His grandfather had taught him one rule: always stop, no matter how tired, no matter how far behind schedule. Some things matter more than time. He pulled over, gravel crunching under his worn tires. "Looks like you could use a hand," he called out, stepping from the truck. Phoenix turned, immediately guarded. She'd learned the hard way that help always came with a price. But this man, covered in sawdust, hands rough from real work, eyes holding nothing but honest concern, he didn't look like he wanted anything from her. "Engine's completely shot," she said, pulling off her sunglasses. "I think the oil line split." Mason walked around the bike, whistling low. "Beautiful machine. 78 shovelhead, right?" He knelt down, inspecting the damage with practiced eyes. "Yeah, your oil line's fried. You're lucky it didn't seize up completely. Could have been dangerous." Phoenix felt something unfamiliar flutter in her chest. This stranger knew more about her motorcycle in 30 seconds than she'd learned in 3 weeks. "Can it be fixed?" she asked. "Absolutely," Mason said, standing and wiping his hands on his jeans. "But not out here. The repair shop in town closed last month. I've got tools and parts at my place. I can tow you there, have you fixed up by tomorrow morning if you want." Everything in Phoenix screamed to say no, but something in his straightforward kindness made her pause. There was no calculation in his offer, just simple decency. "How much?" she asked carefully. Mason shook his head with a small smile. "Let's just get you fixed first. Come on." As he hooked up the motorcycle, Emma hopped out of the truck and walked right up to Phoenix with the fearless confidence only children have. "Hi, I'm Emma," she said, sticking out her tiny hand. "What's your name?" "Phoenix," she replied, shaking the small hand gently. Emma's eyes went wide. "Like the bird that comes back from fire? That's the coolest name ever. Do you like stories? My daddy reads me stories every single night." Phoenix felt her throat tighten. When was the last time someone had talked to her without wanting something? "I love stories," she said softly. Then you have to stay for dinner, Emma declared like it was the simplest thing in the world. Daddy makes the best pancakes. Well, pancakes are really the only thing he makes good. But they're still amazing. Mason laughed from behind the truck. Emma, maybe Phoenix has somewhere else to be. But Phoenix surprised herself. Actually, pancakes sound perfect. The drive to Mason's place took them down winding back roads lined with trees that formed tunnels overhead. Emma talked the entire way about school, her friends, her pet rabbit Marshmallow, and how she wanted to be an astronaut because her mama used to tell her the stars were heaven's nightlights. Phoenix listened, really listened, and realized she hadn't felt this present in years. Mason's house was a small farmhouse with peeling paint and a porch that had seen better days. A tire swing hung from an old oak tree, and wildflowers grew in happy chaos along the fence. To Phoenix, who lived in a penthouse worth millions, it should have looked like nothing. But standing there in the golden afternoon light, it felt more real than anywhere she'd ever been. It's not much, Mason said quietly, unhooking the motorcycle. But it's home. It's beautiful, Phoenix whispered, and she meant it. That evening, Mason cooked in a kitchen covered in Emma's crayon drawings stuck to the fridge with magnets. Phoenix sat at the worn wooden table with a glass of sweet tea, watching this man who worked with his hands flip pancakes with more care than Michelin chefs had ever shown her. So what brings you out here? Mason asked, not looking up from the stove. City girl on a vintage bike in the middle of nowhere. Phoenix chose her words carefully. Just needed to escape for a while. Life got too complicated. I hear that, Mason said, flipping a pancake. Sometimes the simplest answer is the best one. Watching him move around that small kitchen, Phoenix realized something. She'd spent years believing that bigger meant better, that complexity meant success. But here was a man who'd stripped life down to what mattered, and somehow he seemed richer than anyone she'd ever known. Dinner was chaos and laughter. Emma insisted on showing Phoenix every single one of her space books, explaining in detail how rockets worked and why Mars was the best planet. Mason told stories about growing up in this house, how his grandfather built it with his own hands, how every scratch on the floor held a memory. After Emma finally fell asleep, Mason offered Phoenix the guest room. I can call a hotel, Phoenix said, though everything in her wanted to stay. It's not a problem, Mason assured her. Besides, Emma would never forgive me if you left before she could introduce you to Marshmallow tomorrow. That night, Phoenix lay in the small bed listening to crickets through the open window. No traffic, no sirens, no phone buzzing with emergencies, just peace. And in that silence, she finally heard something she'd been running from for years. The sound of her own heart, still beating, still hoping, still capable of feeling. The next morning, she woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee. She found Mason already in the garage, the motorcycle up on a lift, tools spread across his workbench. Morning, he called out. Coffee's in the kitchen. Should have this girl running in a few hours. Phoenix poured a cup and wandered outside where Emma was feeding carrots to Marshmallow, narrating the rabbit's entire day in detail. The little girl grabbed Phoenix's hand and pulled her to the garden. See this, Emma said, touching a tomato plant gently. My mama planted this before she went to heaven. Daddy takes care of it for her. He says as long as we keep it growing, she's still here with us somehow. Phoenix knelt beside the child, tears burning her eyes. In that moment, she understood something her billions had never taught her. Love doesn't end. It just changes form, growing in different soil, feeding different hearts. That's beautiful, Emma, she whispered. Your daddy's absolutely right. Over the next 3 days, something shifted. Phoenix helped Emma with homework and learned that explaining fractions to an 8-year-old required more patience than billion-dollar negotiations. She burned eggs so badly they had to open every window, and they all laughed until they couldn't breathe. She sat on the porch at sunset with Mason, talking about everything and nothing, their conversations flowing easier than any she'd ever had. Mason told her about Rachel, how they met in high school, how she was the brave one, the dreamer who made him believe anything was possible, how grief nearly destroyed him until he looked into Emma's eyes and saw Rachel looking back. Some days are still hard, he admitted, watching the sky turn pink and gold. But Emma reminds me why I get up. She reminds me that life, even when it breaks you, is still worth living. Phoenix wanted to tell him everything. Who she was, the empire, the money, but fear froze her tongue. Would he look at her differently? Would this easy warmth between them turn cold? And yet, sitting beside him, she knew something with absolute certainty. Being truly known was terrifying, but it was also the only way to ever be truly loved. On the fourth morning, Mason came to her with news that broke her heart. He'd gotten a final notice from the bank. 3 months behind on his mortgage. Emma's hospital bills from pneumonia last winter had wiped out his savings, and the sawmill had cut his hours. He'd have to sell the house, the land his grandfather built, the garden his wife planted, the only home Emma had ever known. He tried to smile when he told her, tried to act like it was just another problem to solve. But Phoenix saw the devastation in his eyes, the weight of a man who'd fought so hard and was losing anyway. That night, she couldn't sleep. She paced the tiny room, her mind racing. She'd spent her whole life building an empire, accumulating wealth, proving her worth through numbers on a screen. But here, in this humble farmhouse, she'd found something her money had never bought. She'd found herself. By dawn, she knew what she had to do. She opened her phone and set up an anonymous trust through a foundation she'd created years ago. Enough to pay off the mortgage. Enough for Emma's college. Enough to keep this family secure. She made sure it could never be traced back to her. Before sunrise, she left a note on the kitchen table. Just a few words that couldn't possibly capture what these days had meant. Thank you for showing me what real wealth means. Then she climbed on her motorcycle and rode away, every mile breaking her heart a little more. She'd learned something profound. Sometimes the truest act of love isn't solving everything. It's honoring someone's dignity enough to let them stand tall, even when you have the power to save them. 2 weeks later, Mason stood in his kitchen holding an envelope from a foundation he'd never heard of. Inside was a letter saying his family had been selected for an anonymous grant. All debts paid. Emma's education secured. No strings attached. He read it 3 times, his hands shaking. Then he found the small note tucked inside, handwritten on expensive paper. The phoenix rises from ashes, but she never forgets who taught her to fly. His breath caught. That evening, he turned on the news and there she was. Phoenix Monroe, tech billionaire, announcing a new initiative to help struggling families in small towns. Her face filled the screen. "Daddy," Emma gasped. "That's Phoenix. That's our Phoenix." Mason stared at the television, and slowly, understanding washed over him. She'd been running from the same emptiness he'd been fighting. And instead of anger or betrayal, he felt something else entirely. Gratitude, because she'd honored him by keeping his dignity intact. "Yeah, baby," he whispered, pulling Emma close. "That's our Phoenix." 8 months passed. Mason kept the farm, started a small repair shop in town, and watched Emma's dreams grow bigger every day. They talked about Phoenix sometimes, always with warmth, always with gratitude. Then one Saturday in October, a familiar engine rumbled up the driveway. Mason was under the hood of a customer's truck when he heard it. He straightened slowly, his heart hammering. Emma was faster, racing across the yard with a shriek of joy. Phoenix pulled off her helmet, her hair shorter now, her eyes softer. She caught Emma in a fierce hug, both of them laughing and crying at once. Mason walked over slowly, and for a long moment, they just looked at each other. "You came back," he said quietly. "I had to," Phoenix replied, her voice breaking. "I left something here." "What's that?" "The only version of myself I've ever actually liked." Emma tugged on Phoenix's jacket. "Are you staying this time? Please say you're staying." Phoenix looked at Mason, every wall down, every fear exposed. "That depends. Is there room for a billionaire who's tired of running?" Mason's smile started slow but lit up his whole face. "I think we can manage. But fair warning, you're helping with the garden. And Emma's homework. And I still only know how to make pancakes." "That's all I need," Phoenix whispered. Emma clapped her hands. This is the best day ever. Can Marshmallow be in the wedding? Emma! Mason laughed, blushing. But Phoenix knelt to Emma's level, tears shining in her eyes. I think Marshmallow would be perfect. But maybe we should start with dinner first. As the three of them walked toward the house, the sunset painting everything gold, Phoenix finally understood. Home wasn't something you could buy or build. It was people who saw past your walls to the heart underneath and loved you anyway. And sometimes the richest life was the one you never planned but had the courage to choose. That evening, they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the twilight. Emma nestled between them. You know what's funny? Mason said, his shoulder touching hers. I spent years thinking I had nothing to offer anyone. Just a struggling farm and a second-hand life. And I spent years thinking I had everything, Phoenix replied softly. When really, I had nothing that mattered. He took her hand, his rough palm against her soft skin. Guess we both learned something. What's that? That real wealth isn't what you have in your account. It's what you're willing to give from your heart. If this story reminded you that love finds us when we stop chasing it, that kindness is never wasted, and that the best version of yourself is often found in the simplest moments, then like, subscribe, and share for more stories that matter. Drop a comment below and tell us about a time someone's unexpected kindness changed your life. Because in a world that often feels cold and calculated, stories like these remind us that warmth still exists, that connection still matters, and that sometimes the greatest treasure is the person who sees you, really sees you, and stays anyway. Thank you for being part of this community. Remember, one act of grace can rewrite someone's entire story.